come here. I want to tell you something. I just did an interview with one of the members of the Department of Defense, the Ministry of Defense in England. And I now know, and you will soon know, the problem with the Ministry of Defense. In fact, the problem with the whole nation of England. I just talked to a man who I am told was paid by the taxpayers of Great Britain, who tells us that 9/11 was conducted by Al-Qaeda. I talked about Al-Qaeda. Ted Gunderson and I had talked about the coming back to the World Trade Center of the FBI, who had actually paid for the bomb that went in to have the first explosion in the World Trade Center in 1993. You're supposed to believe this preposterous story. And he tries to logically put it together. He's a nice guy. Looks like a sweetheart of a guy, but he just, well, he's having a little difficulty explaining to me, and probably to you, how Jet A fuel, which burns at about 700 degrees, can melt steel. He said, oh, well, it didn't melt. It was just he weakened the, no, it didn't weaken the steel. You could pour Jet A fuel on steel for the next 2,000 years, and it wouldn't weaken. No, it wouldn't get soft. I asked about the explosions. Oh, maybe he didn't see that portion of the film. He says, well, you got to believe everything you see when a film. He's just kidding, of course. But when you see the reality, to deny what you see, you've got to be kidding. Or you've got to be fooling, right? I mean, oh, God. And they paid this man money? Well, you have to pay somebody money to tell that story. I asked about the BBC, a reporter talking to the BBC. And in the background is building number 7. And she's saying that it went down. The building is still up. She's talking to the BBC. And you look around, there's the building behind her. Then a few minutes later, the building goes down. They got the news before it happened. He says, oh, how can you distrust the BBC? God almighty. Are we in different worlds? Can there be people like Nick+Pope? God help us. God help England. How can a man reach maturity and get a job in the Ministry of Defense and tell such, or believe such preposterous lies because they're simply given to him from credible sources? Incredible lies from credible sources. But I guess you have to consider the source. England is in deep kimchi. Our EnglandUK.com has been put together by myself and Bill Coons, so we can explain to some of you just how bad it is, and what a blessing it was to have this interview with Nick+Pope. And I'm not saying that lightly. He seemed like a nice gentleman. Mousy, yes, but he's sat down with me, willing to sit across from me and get into this subject. Oh, and a couple other questions about some of those things that he believes. To believe the unbelievable, to accept the unacceptable, to defend the indefensible. An inside job? Oh, no. He wouldn't admit to that. Could I do another interview with him somewhere down the line? I would hope so, but I think not. Nick+Pope from the Ministry of Defense. An unbelievable interview that you are about to see. This is Anthony J. Hilder with Free World Alliance. Oh, and he was talking about the British nation being run from London. I don't know what he's smoking, or if you believe that, I don't know what you're smoking. It's run from Brussels. The sovereignty of Britain was surrendered at the Lisbon Treaty. Britain is run like a puppet from the Parliament. And I talked about EU, Hitler's dream come true. The EU is Hitler's dream come true. The Enabling Act that was passed here under the name of the Homeland Security Act in the United States is straight out of the Nazi doctrine for world government. You know, he says, no, we're not going towards a world government. Quite the contrary, we're going in the opposite direction. Who would have believed it? I mean, even the dumbest of the dumb could figure that out. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one world, one race, one ruler, one European Union, no Britain, no sovereignty, no sense. Watch the film. OurEnglandUK.com is the site. Our film company, Free World Film Works, and yes, we are working at inciting a revelation. Nick+Pope, formerly with the Ministry of Defense in England. Nick, may we use this on film?
You, certainly.
Okay. One always asks the question, why are we at war, both Britain and the United States, against Afghanistan? Why?
We're not at war with Afghanistan. We are, however, at war with elements of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban on the basis that they are not only terrorists, but they are exporting that terrorism to the Western world, as we've seen on many occasions.
When did they export terrorism to the Western world?
Al-Qaeda has exported terrorism on numerous occasions, the USS Cole, the embassy bombs, 9/11, and all sorts of other attacks.
Wait, you say 9/11. 9/11, according to most people who have done a thorough investigation, is an inside job.
No, it's not.
You say no.
I worked for government for 21 years. I know what governments do, I know what governments don't do. And, you know, I've looked at both sides of this. I've looked at the conspiracy theories. I've looked at the 9/11 Commission report.
You're familiar with the law that allowed Adolf Hitler to become dictator of Germany, and the 9/11 law that resulted, the Homeland Security Act, is based very much on it, even word for word in some cases.
Well, I would disagree with that.
The Enabling Act.
I would disagree with that.
Okay. Can you tell me how a building could come down with simply the burning of jet fuel, which Jet A fuel burns at about 700 degrees, to melt steel? It's going to take 2,200. How could that defies logic?
This is one of the popular.
How is it?
This is one of the popular misconceptions of 9/11. For the building to collapse, you don't need the steel support structures to melt, which, as you say, does happen at a higher temperature than aviation fuel burns. What you do need is for the steel to lose its structural integrity, and that happens at a much lower temperature. So the physics and the engineering is not in dispute.
It just defies logic, because we take a look at the explosions, and you see the explosions as they come down on the North Tower, the South Tower, and there is one other building called Building Number 7
Yes.
It wasn't hit with an airplane.
No. Debris hit it, it caught fire, and it collapsed.
But it came down in the same configuration as one would witness at an implosion.
Well, I've spoken to people who do controlled demolitions, and they've looked at some of the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and they've not been convinced.
They haven't been convinced. But building number 7 was being... We saw a woman on the BBC. She was talking on the BBC, and she says, building number 7 has come down. Behind the woman, in the background, we've got building 7. It was up, and she was saying that it had already come down before it came down. How could that be unless the BBC was cooperating in line?
Well, I would find it a very bizarre conspiracy theory that would include in it the BBC. But be that as it may, I think this was a very confused situation. A lot was going on. The building was clearly on fire and in danger of collapse. This is a woman who's got things coming in through her earpiece. People are telling her different pieces of information. I think it's a simple mistake. It's not a conspiracy.
How can it possibly be a mistake when she's saying that the building has collapsed? There was no danger of that building coming down, and it came down in and on itself like any normal implosive device. It was set. In fact, Larry+Silverstein asked why he brought the building down. Or, it came down. He says, well, it was in danger, we had to do it. And to set up an implosion takes...
That's not my understanding of what he actually said. The phrase that's often used is pull it, as in bring it down.
That means to bring it down.
No. Actually, what he was referring to was the firefighting team that was in the building. And what Larry+Silverstein said was, too many people have died already on this day. I say we get the team out of there. Pull it. I.e., pull the team out, not pull the building down.
That's absolutely preposterous. I mean, I've got a film, 911, The Greatest Lie Ever Sold. In fact, the former head of the FBI in Los Angeles and Dallas and Memphis, Ted Gunderson, and I were talking about the FBI lie coming back to the World Trade Center and doing it again. We talked about that on film in 1995, 6 years before the event. And when we talk about Al-Qaeda, it's LCIADA, and we see that all of this is being orchestrated to bring about a world government.
Well, I don't see that happening at all.
You don't see it happening?
No. If anything, we live in a more fragmented society. I mean, look at what's happened since the breakup of the former Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Countries aren't amalgamating and coming together into some new world order, one world government. Quite the opposite's happening.
What is the United Nations?
Well, the United Nations is certainly a body that attempts to coordinate policy between different countries, but it's about as far away from one world government in the sense that conspiracy theorists mean it than you could ever get.
But Nick, we see the EU as Hitler's dream come true. Hitler wanted a united Europe. EU, Hitler's dream come true.
Well,
I've done, in fact...